We're going to have a little look at some basic tool commands in Photoshop. There are quite a few tools in Photoshop and you probably won't need to use all of them, but it really just depends on what you're doing with Photoshop and the type of use for it. If you're using it as a drawing software, if you're using it in illustration software, if you're using it as a Photoshop editing software for pictures and images, if you're using it for layout, there's different tools for different jobs, and on top of that there's no one way of doing the same task. There's lots and lots of different ways of approaching it. So what you'll find is Photoshop's a very versatile tool, and those tools can be used within it in different ways. And it's really down to you to find techniques and habits that work well for you. I have mine, but the way that I do something will be different to the way that someone else does it. Their way might be quicker than mine, but I might have got quicker at doing it the way I do it. So it's really just down to you to find a workflow that suits you with the tools that you feel most comfortable with. So what we'll do today is we'll talk about a couple of them that I use quite frequently, and then we'll build this up over the coming weeks, and we'll try and introduce quite a few of them. So if we look at Photoshop as a software, if we open it up down here, let's have a look here. First thing we're going to want to do is create a page. So we know where this is now. This is in File, New, and at the minute it says 72 pixels per inch. It's probably set up for whatever I was using it with before. What you really want is to have a A3 page, because that's large, and you want to have it at 300 pixels per inch when you're using Photoshop. The reason you do that is it has more detail to it. So if you have a lower resolution, what it means is per inch of the screen there are less pixels, pixels being dots that you can work on. We'll talk about that a little bit later on as well, but it's important that you have a high resolution on your page because it gives you more dots on the page, which makes your image clearer and sharper. So when we're working in Photoshop for printing your boards or whatever you're doing at university, I always use 300 pixels per inch. You can go down to about 200, and I wouldn't really recommend going any less really, but about 300 is a good size. So I'll name it, I'll just call it test, and we'll save that. So we'll just go File, Save As, just make sure it's saved. You see this here, this is a coding.psd, that's a Photoshop file. If you choose JPEG, which is what you'll use for saving your images, it'll say .jpeg. If you're doing a bitmap, it'd be .bitmap.bmp. If you ever rename your work after you've used it and the file becomes unrecognized and the software you're using, whether it be Mac or PC, can't recognize a file, always put in dot and then whatever you need after. It'll bring the image back. There's been a few times I've renamed JPEGs, for example, and then when I've opened up my computer it says it doesn't recognize a file. That can be quite stressful when you have a hand in, you need to print your boards. But just drop in the .jpeg at the end of your JPEG image and it will sort of reinvigorate the image, it will bring it back. So it's just a little tip in case you ever lose work. Photoshop.psd, and we'll save that to desktop, so just click OK, replace it because that's an old one. Now in terms of the canvas, we want to turn it round. So if you go to Image, image sizes here, canvas sizes here, and image rotations here. This is about manipulating this page. So if you look at image size, it says 300. If we put it to centimeters, we can see that it's 29 by 42, which means it's an A3, and these are the amount of pixels on the page. If we drop this down here, so we put 100, they will drop as well because pixels per inch. So this is 100 pixels per inch now. If we put it up to 300, obviously the size of the canvas gets bigger because it has more information in it. So we save that, and we go to Image, and we go to Image Rotation. We can flip it around, we'll do 90 degrees clockwise, and we'll just save that to make sure that that's set up how we want it. Now, in terms of using tools, down here we'll start with the Zoom tool. This is the one at the bottom here. There's a different way you can do it. You can click on 100%, it will bring it right up as big as the page actually is on your screen. That's okay sometimes, but it can be a bit dwarfing. You can just do fit screen, which will bring it down to fit the boundaries exactly. Fill screen will bring it to the edges. So we do it on fit screen. We've got rulers on the edges at the minute. We can hide those by going View, Rulers, and we can turn those off. If you want to bring them back or do anything actually with shortcuts in Photoshop, it's worth learning these. If you look in Window or View, let's have a look in View, you see there's like a Command R. If I'm using Mac or PC, there might be Control R in PC. But these little commands just mean you can make shortcuts with them. So for saving would be Command S, for example. Open would be Command O. Free transform, when you change the size of an image, is Control T. So if we want to bring the rulers back, I'll do Command and R, and it brings them in. If I do Command and R again, they go away. It's the same way that if you want to do cut and paste, you do Control X and Control C and Control V for paste. Shortcuts are good if you learn them because they help you speed up your workflow when you're using Photoshop. It's handy. It's handy to do. So with the paintbrush being here, now down the bottom we've got colours. Now there's two colours you can choose from. It just means you can work between two colours if you're rendering or colouring. That's handy to have. If you click on it here, you've got your colours palette. Down here you can choose the gradients. It's not the gradients, sorry, all the ranges of colour to move all the way through. And on here, the left hand side, you have the gradients. So you've got light and dark, and then you've got colour here. So if I go down to say a blue down here, I can have a very rich blue, or I can move across and fade it out. I can bring it down into the greys. You can see it really here. The current colour, if I choose this one here as a colour, this blue, and click OK, the top of this box now goes blue. And if I click on it again, this says new and current being the colour that we have. If I choose an orange now, which is a bit further down here, like this is now showing me the colour I'm going to have. If I click OK, it replaces this colour down here. Now sometimes that can be frustrating because you want to keep the colour that you had before. So what I can do is I can swap that over. I can choose the white and then choose my second colour and click OK. And then what we do is we have two colours, and I can toggle between those two colours like this. Right? There's also a swatch palette here, and what I can do is if I want to keep that orange, whatever orange that is, I can actually just physically drag that into the swatch palette. Now what I do is I put on the pointer tool here, bring that red in, and I can drag that in to the swatch palette. We should be able to, if I take it from here, it's here, add to swatches. It's a little bit different. So if you look on there, swatch 2, that's the colour we have. If we choose a different colour and click this and just click add to swatches, and then we can name that second colour. They've changed it, you used to be able to drag it in. That drops it in here. So if you mix up your own colours or you change your own colours, you can keep them in the swatch palette. I don't really use it that often, to be honest. I just sort of make them, mix them as I'm working. So these are your colours down here. If you want to reset it, you can click that box and it goes back to black and white. And if you come up here, we've got the brush. Now the way the brush tool works is on the top left hand side you've got brush size. So if I open this up here, you'll see you can change the size of the brush, really big to really small, and you've got hardness of the brush. Now this will work differently because I have a tablet on at the moment. So what I'm going to do is turn the tablet settings off. Brush settings are in here, and at the minute brush shape is off, which is good. That's fine, we'll close that down. And if I press caps lock or capitals, you'll get the actual size of the paintbrush itself. Now, on your keyboard, there is two keys called parentheses. They look like brackets on 9 and 0, but they're not. They're the ones which are next to the enter button. They're called parentheses. They look like brackets, but they're straighter. If you press the one on the right hand side, you can actually increase the size of the brush. If you press the one on the left hand side, you can decrease the size of the brush. So we're going to have a brush that's around 500 in size. The colour is the top one, that is black. And if I click on this, the hardness is 100%, which means if I make a new layer on here, you don't really want to draw on the background, you always want to keep that off. So we're going to make a new layer, I'm going to call that paint, like that. Okay, and I'll make sure that layer is selected. And then press the caps lock button to bring it back. If I press this down once, I get a black dot. Right, now that is actually a layer. I've actually created an image. If I go to my layers and turn off the background here and we use the pointer tool, this is actually an image. It's a piece that I can move around. Now if I turn that back on again and go back to the same layer, I can continue to draw on this layer. So I can get my brush and I can make the brush a little bit smaller and I can just draw something like that, okay, for example. So this is easy because I've got a drawing tablet. It's a little bit harder with the mouse. So I can do that, and if I was to turn the background off, this would be my layer. Okay, this is the shape that I've created on here. Now if I do Control Z, I can delete this. If you do Control Alt and Z, you can actually delete all the way back. If I want to make a new layer, something slightly different, I'll go back to the brush and we'll make the brush big again. But this time what we'll do is we'll change the hardness, we'll bring the hardness right down, and what that does is it completely softens the brush into more like an airbrush. And if I press it once, you get this. And if I press it and move it around a bit more, what you end up getting is a kind of faded sort of effect like this, you see. Okay, like this. So we can build up dots and spots which are quite faded out. It's useful to know, it's very handy, but it's very, very different from this one here. If we turn off the background, this is indeed itself a layer as well, the same as this one was here. But you can see the difference in the types of brushes. Now, using a mouse, you're kind of restricted a little bit to some degree when you're using these tools, although they are still possible to use. But what's really nice is when you have a tablet, if we come back to the brush here and go back to brush settings, there's a place in, well, there's lots of things in there, but one of them is called Shape Dynamics. Now you want to make sure that your spacing is set to 1%. It means it's a clean line. If you have it further down, you get like a dotted line. So I'd keep my spacing at 1%, and I'd turn my Shape Dynamics on. Now if you go into Shape Dynamics, in here you have options for controlling it. You can turn it off, which means there's no pen pressure, or you can turn it on to pen pressure, which means the brush actually works just like a pen. So if I now take the hardness back up to 100%, like on here, and make the brush a little bit smaller. So now the brush is at 100% size in terms of hardness, and if I just push very, very gently and move the mouse, and then I push a little bit harder, you can get a thicker line like this, you see. So the sensitivity of the Photoshop using a tablet just allows you to change the way that it draws on the screen. Now I can change the colours. I can go into here, and I can maybe get a red, put a red in there like that, and go back in there and maybe choose a blue, put a blue in there, and then go in here, choose yellows. So this is how the brush works. Now I've made a mistake because I've gone and drawn on the background layer, which was a bit of a mistake. So we'll sort that out. So yeah, that's harder to do with a mouse because you don't have that control that you have with using it with a pen pressure. If I now go back to this and put the hardness on 0 and put on here, you can see that the edge is a little bit more feathered. It's like a softer edge on here. Now we've got a load of colours actually on the page. What you can do is use the eyedropper tool. Now the eyedropper tool is here, and what this will do is sample colours. So now I can click on this and it will sample the blue. I can click on this and it will sample the red. I can click on this and it will sample the black. Now there's a quicker way of doing that. If you're actually using the brush, if I hold down the Alt button, ALT, I can actually sample colours as I work. So now I'm on black. If I press down Alt again, you see on the bottom of that circle there's black and the top is yellow. That's the top one is showing me what colour I'm on. The one underneath is showing me the colour I was with. So now I can move around and pick a colour, which means I can do a blue line, I can sample a red there, and I can do a red line, I can sample a black there, and just keep working. And this is really nice when you're painting, because if you're painting between two different colours, you can sample colours left and right of the colours that you're using to help you paint. Okay, so this is all good. This is using brush, so soft brush and a hard brush. And your brush settings and shape dynamics are in here. You can turn them off and you can turn them on depending on whether you have a tablet or not. If you don't, you'll have a mouse, which means your brush will be fixed like this. But that's not always a bad thing. It just means you'll have less control over using it as you would do with using a tablet. So for the rest of this session, I'm going to continue to use a tablet, not necessarily because it has pen pressure, but just because it's more easy for me to use than the mouse that I was using last time. Now the eraser that we have here does exactly the same thing as the paintbrush. It does exactly the same. So what we'll do is we'll open up, we'll double click the background layer and we'll turn this into a layer. And now this is a solid layer because I've drawn on the background layer. It's basically just one clump of an image. The eraser tool will let you delete things. So if we make a new layer, and I'm just going to draw something on a new layer here. Actually, we'll turn this off. We'll draw a couple of things like this. Put a couple of colours into it, like that. And we'll make a new layer and we'll put that at the bottom, and we'll just make that white using the paint bucket tool. So we create a new background layer. And basically now the eraser works the same way as the brush does. You can do the paint settings in here to do pen pressure or not, depending on when you want shape dynamics or pen pressure. It works in exactly the same way. Also it has the same thing about hardness and size. So if I make the eraser tool 100% hard, I could then cut out or delete very, very clear lines like this. I can actually rub that out if we turn off the background. Or I can make it like a soft brush. and then just erase little bits of it like this. Okay. Now this is really useful when we're working on images. So if we close this down and we go to the desktop here, I've got a couple of images off the internet which we're going to use. If we go to Google, the thing you've got to remember is when you're getting images off the internet, if you type in Apple, what you want to make sure is that when you're picking images, there's a high resolution. So this image here has 3172 by 2709. It's a big image. This image is quite small in comparison to this one. This one down here, which now seems to have moved, is even smaller. But anything with low numbers in them, like this, 400 by 456, is a small image in terms of pixels per inch. What you want is something that has a high image pixels like this. Now if I open up both these in Photoshop, you can sometimes drag those just into the software which will open them. And what we can do is we'll have a look at a couple of other tools and how we use them. So we'll do File, New, and we'll create an A3 page. And we'll just rotate that 90 degrees. Okay, good. And make it a little bit bigger, and we'll fit it to screen. So here we've got one apple, and this one I think is the larger of the two. Now, if I want to cut this out, if I actually want to work on this on the page and create some kind of board from it, the best way of doing that to cut this out would be to use, well, there's actually a number of tools that we can use, but one of them is the Magic Wand tool. Now the Magic Wand tool is this one here. Now the way it works is there are tolerances. The higher tolerance, the more aggressive it is in picking up colour. The lower the tolerance, the less accurate it is in picking up colour. So if I was to put this at 100% tolerance and then click somewhere in the apple, it would find everything in the apple within that colour range that I clicked on. If I deselect that by Control and D, or you can go to Select, Deselect, which is there, Control D, look. If I then put that at a tolerance of 1 and click in the middle, it will just pick up one small pixel that you can kind of see there. So what we want to do is we want to take away all of this white if we can. There's a couple of ways of doing that. But a very quick way is to use the Magic Wand tool to pick up most of the white, and then we're going to use the eraser tool to get rid of the rest of it. So at the minute I'm going to try a tolerance of about 50 and see what happens. I'm going to click on the white, and see how it started to snap into the side of the apple here. It's a little bit too aggressive. So we'll go back and we'll try maybe 30. We'll try again. And yeah, that's about right. That's pretty good. So we're going to cut this out, and we're going to use the eraser tool to get rid of the rest of this. It can't quite get into here because this is too dark. It's just working on the whites. Now you can't cut anything from a background layer. You have to undo that, double click it and turn it into a layer. And then if we go Control and X, we'll cut away all of this background that's gone. So if you zoom in here, if you have a look a little bit on the edges, you can see how this has actually cut out that apple fairly well. You can start to see the pixels here that I was talking about. This image is 72 pixels per inch as I think a resolution, if I remember right. So we go to image size and have a look. Yep, it's 72 pixels per inch, which means if I turn on rulers, per inch of this screen there's 72 dots. Right? Now if we zoom out a little bit to about here, what we need to do now is get rid of this little bit down here. Now we could have cut this out using something called paths, but we're not going to get into those today. What we are going to look at is the eraser tool. So I'm going to choose the eraser tool. If I press the capitals button, that will hide that and make it a point, but it's hard to see how big the brush is. Also at the minute, if you have a look, the brush is set at minimum hardness, so it's a very soft brush, which means if I was to click the eraser here, it would take off a soft amount like this. If I was to click it and make the brush 100% hard, it will take off an exact amount. See? Now I've got my sensitivity still set up, so what I'm going to do is turn that off. I'm going to go into here and turn off brush shape, which will make it a solid brush, so there's no pressure sensitivity anymore. We'll close this down, and I'm going to use the parenthesis button to make this small. And this is where having a tablet is also very handy, because now I can come in here and I can start to delete with gentle lines. I can start to just delete some of this Now this is starting to look really jumpy on my computer. That's because I'm using software to record at the same time, so it's struggling a little bit. And on top of that, I'm also trying to do it quickly. Normally you'd spend a little bit longer doing this than in a rush. Okay, so we're just going to do it very, very gently for now. Okay. It's quite hard to do when it's jumping about so much. A little bit easier when the computer's got a bit more resource, which you should find should be okay if you're just working in Photoshop normally. Right, judging on the size of the image, I don't think you're going to notice that too much, so I'm just going to leave that as it is. Now the edge of this is quite cold, it's like quite a rough edge, because when we cut it out, we use the marquee selection tool. Now if I put a new layer in here and stick it on the bottom, and then we choose a black colour, now this is the paint bucket tool, which means this will drop colour onto the page. If I zoom out and use the paint bucket tool on the layer below the apple, on here, what it will do is it will drop on a load of black, and you can start to see where the selection tool didn't do such a great job with getting all the white. See here, it's very, very rough. All around these edges are really, really rough and pixelated and jumpy. And of course the edge that I cut down at the bottom is also a little bit rubbish too. So there's a little way we can get around that, and we can cut off a little bit more of the edge of the image to soften it a little bit. So if we go back to the Apple image here, and if we hold down, let's have a look, the Command or cursor button when you're over the paintbrush icon of the layer, you'll see this little box, and that means it's going to select. It's a selection tool. If you click on that now, you see this dotted line here. This dotted line is a selection tool, and it basically just means it's waiting for you to make a choice what you do with the image next. Are you going to cut something out? Are you going to add something on? I can paint with inside that if I want. Now that that edge is selected, if I was to then make a new layer here, if I was to make a new layer, let's delete this one, don't know where that other one came from. This selection tool here, I could then take layer 2 and get my brush, and because it's selected, there's a dotted line around it. In theory, if I was to make that a hard brush, I could actually now paint inside that selected area, because that selected line is stopping the brush going outside of that dotted line on a new layer. You see? Like this. But anyway, that's another thing altogether. So at the minute this line is selected around the outside, what we're going to do is we're going to bring this line in ever so slightly just to feather the edge of this. So if you go to select and modify, and you can do feather, and what feather does is it takes a little bit of the edge of the pixels and it just blurs out. It just blurs out a little bit of a cutted edge. So if we do feather radius to say 5 pixels, I'll see what happens. It's a bit of a trial and error really with this. And we do Control X. See if that works. No, come back. Then we do select inverse. So we flip it round to cut the outside, and then cut that out. So you can always reverse the selection like we did there by doing select and inverse. So instead of cutting the outside of the inside of the apple, you can actually make it cut the outside of the apple. So we'll cut that away. I did Control and X, which is cut. And if you come back in now, if we zoom back into the edge of this apple, what it's actually done is it's taken a few of those bad pixels and it's started to blur them out a little bit. It just softened the edge a little bit from the cut, and probably down the bottom of mine a little bit too. So it just makes it a bit more of a blended image. So now if we go to new and we go and make an A3 page, which I think we've already got open here, and we take something like the orchard image here, we're going to take this one and bring this into Photoshop like that, and we're going to just maybe do something with this apple. If you wanted to then drag this apple and bring this onto the orchard image like this, because we've blurred these images around the edge here, it's softened it up a little bit on the picture. Okay, now we'll just delete that for now, and we're going to use this image as a background. It's not particularly the best image, but it will do. There's a couple of things I want to change with it. I want it black and white for a start. I don't want it to be colour. So a way of doing that was, if we come to layers, it's a background image. this one because we just brought it in as a flat image. So we're going to go to Image Adjustments and Hues and Saturations. Now in the Hues and Saturations, what you can do is actually change the types of colours. So here we can go to a nice red, or we can move that along and sort of make it a bit green. But we can also drop the colour out of it altogether to make it like a black and white sort of colour. That was actually quite nice actually in red. So maybe we'll drop that down to there. Just knock the colour out of it a little bit. Something like that. Okay, then we'll open up a new layer on here, and we will double click background so we can work on it, and we'll swap the layers over. And on the bottom one, what I'm going to do is we turn this picture off. I'm going to put white background like this using the paint bucket tool. Now the reason I do that is because then if I can go back to this layer and change the opacity, I can actually drop that right down like that and actually sort of fade that image out, because I'm fading it to a white colour which is just behind this image, like this. Now if I go back to the image we had before, we'll get rid of this, I think. Forget that. I'll go back to the apple that we cut out, and I'm going to drag that in here. Now at the minute that's way too big, so the way of making it smaller is I can go to Edit and Transform, or Free Transform here, sorry, which is Control T. If you click on that, it will give you a control box around the image that you just brought in. Now with this you can actually change the size of it. If I was to grab that edge there, you can pull this down like that. It can actually adjust how big that is. So normally what you might have to do is hold down Shift, because if you don't, you can actually squash the image a little bit too much. So if we do it again, and I hold down the Shift button, which is here, I can drag that image up, and I can resize that to whatever I need. Okay, like that. Click OK, and then we can set that image on there like that. So technically what we've done, we've cut this image of the apple out. I'm not going to use that one because that's too small. We've taken this image, we've cut out using the marquee tool, and we've stuck it on a background like this. Now, another thing you might want to do is you might want to make that a little bit smaller. Yeah, like that. You might want to put this here. Like that. And you might decide that you want this image to be a little bit thinner. So the tool under this one here is a crop tool. We can click on the crop tool and we can bring this up. We can actually change the size of the image a little bit. We can cut off the bits we don't want. Like that. You can hit OK and delete it. So we can change the actual size of the image in terms of the length and the width to make the image look a little bit more focused. And let's have a look. Now, other things that we could do on top of that, we've messed about with the brush tool a little bit, we've had a look at the eraser tool a little bit, we talked about the paint bucket tool a little bit. In terms of copying things over, if you wanted to duplicate this image, you can grab the layer that it's on, which being this one here, and you can drop that into the new layer box down the bottom there. And what that will do is actually copy that over for you, like this. Now another way of doing it would be to press down Alt or Alt. If you hold down Alt, you can actually copy it over yourself. And actually if we do that one more time, I'll copy that over as all four. So I'm going to hold down Shift and select these layers all together. We can move them about. You can move all of them together like that. Now there's a button up here called Auto Select. If you turn that off, it just means that it stays on the last layer that you used. If you click on Auto Select like this, you should be able to pick any layer and move it around individually like this, like so. Now the way that the layer palettes work, we move that around to about here. The way that these layer palettes work down here is the order that you put them in is the order that the images are. So if I take this apple at the bottom and drag that and put it at the top, it'll put it at the top. If I drag this one and put it here, it'll put it here, and so on and so forth. So basically the way this works is your layer palette is like layers of a cake. Basically the top layer is the top layer on the image, and the bottom layer is the bottom layer on the image. If I want to drag that down, that can go back behind there. Okay. So that's the basics of using cutout tools, using the marquee tool. There's loads of other ones we'll get into at another time. If you wanted to add some sort of like funky sort of effects to these, there's a couple of things you can do. If we pick, so this apple on the end here, and hold down Command and click over that, that will select this apple on its own. Then we can go to Image, Adjustments, and maybe we can take the colour out of it altogether. So we can either desaturate it or go to Hues and Saturations. Why is that layer empty? Let's have a look. Is this one? Okay. Image, Adjustments, Hues and Saturations. We can take the colours out of this altogether to make this one black and white. And then we can do what we did the other day. We can go to Levels. And in Levels, what we can do is play around with the darks a little bit. So this needs to darken down a little bit. So on the left, you've got the darks. On the right, you've got the lights. We can just pull the darks down to there, like this. Push the whites up here to make it a little bit more interesting. If we were to pick the apple next to it and hold down Command, we'll select that one instead. We can maybe change the colours. So we'll go to Image, Adjustments, Hues and Saturations again. Now I can use, these are here, or I can choose a colour once. I want to choose reds, and I want to change the reds to maybe green. Let's have a look. Why isn't that working? That's because I've got it on the wrong layer. There we go. Image, Adjustments, Hues and Saturations, and let's have a look. Is that right? Yep. So now I can choose the reds, for example, and I can change all the reds only, leaving the other greens, so you can make that look a bit more interesting. Or we could just do it with a master. Actually, if we cancel that and do that again, Image, Adjustments, Hues and Saturations, we can just change the colour of the apple altogether, make it really green and blue. Okay, like that. Then we could take the apple, which is here, this third one, and we hold down Command and select it again. Yeah. Now, there's other things you can do called filters. So we go to Filters, and have a look in here. There are loads of different filters that you can use. The filter gallery is usually where you find them, and there's loads of different ones. There's one I like to use, which is in the artistic, which is called Cutout. And if you choose Cutout here, you can cartoon things a little bit. And if you mess about with this a little bit here, it takes a little while to get it right. Every image is slightly different. Let's have a play around. That's how I do the cartoon characters sometimes when I'm using them. I use something like a cutout level filter. Okay, so we'll just drop that down to, yeah, we'll just do that for now. So that can be the third one. And then we'll leave the apple on the right alone, I think. We'll leave that as it is. So there's a couple of simple tools in Photoshop. We'll talk a little bit more about things next time and how we can edit images and make photos look a little bit better. And maybe next time we'll get into the blur tools and the sharpen tools. But that's how you cut an image out. That's how you resize an image. That's how you use your layers. That's how you add a background. And that should about do. So have a play around with that. Good luck. Mess about with these tools a little bit yourself. But the most important ones are the cutout tools, the brush tools, the eraser tools, paint bucket tool, type tool, and the magic wand tool will be good to get into. All right. So all the best, and I'll catch up with you later. Cheers.